In today's brief video, I want to take a moment and discuss with you guys some of the more serious consequences of weed withdrawal symptoms that some individuals may face when quitting smoking weed, a few of which I personally struggled with after battling a THC addiction for a period of about 9 years of my life. If you wind up enjoying the content in today's video, be sure to check out the pinned comment or the video description to download our free 7-step guide to quit smoking weed today, to learn more about our paid mental health community, or to learn more about our paid one-on-one addiction recovery coaching programs. Now, before we jump into those topics though, I want to say this. A lot of times people will reach out to our offices and say, listen, I was doing great quitting smoking weed, but then my PTSD nightmares returned, or I started to get irregular heart rate, and this is really bad. And it is, and we want you to consult with your doctor on that stuff. But the reality is, you are not the first person to experience symptoms like this when coming off of a substance, nor will you be the last. And I say that in the most compassionate way possible because there's people who have gone through this before, myself included, who actively sought out and found solutions to each of these problems. And I'm going to share those with you guys today. But I'm saying this because so many people will quit smoking weed. They'll run into a physical withdrawal symptom, go into complete panic, and then return to the very substance that put them in this position in the first place. So please don't fall for that. I understand how alarming it can be. I understand how uncomfortable it can be, but I promise you there's solutions out there, but it's on you to remain accountable to yourself and to seek out those solutions, some of which you're going to be doing today by watching this video. So let's start with nightmares and PTSD first, okay? Weed has been for many years well received by people who suffer from PTSD because cannabis blocks REM sleep. This is our dream sleep. And for some people, when they quit smoking weed, those nightmares return, and they're more like night terrors. And this is very, very common with PTSD. So what happens is after a period of 30, 60, 90 days of insomnia and waking up just in a deep sweat from PTSD related nightmares, people eventually return to smoking weed because they can't take it anymore. Now, in a case like this, I would encourage you guys to read up on Dr. Matthew Walker. He's like a world-renowned sleep expert, and the medication that he discusses in regard to people who suffer from PTSD, it's called prazosin, prazosin. And this is actually a blood pressure medication. It's not a sedative, and it helps to prevent the release of adrenaline and noradrenaline while we're sleeping, so someone can experience a healthy level of dreaming without having a physical reaction to it. Because that's what happens with PTSD. People get nightmares, and their body shouldn't be releasing adrenaline and norepinephrine when they sleep, or noradrenaline, but it is. This drug can prevent that from happening, according to Dr. Matthew Walker. He's a Stanford, worker, and he has some great books out there called Why We Sleep. And I would highly, highly recommend reading articles on him or checking out his content. But perhaps if this is something you're suffering with, this is something that you can speak to your family physician about or your psychiatrist or psychologist about. The next thing that I want to talk about, which can often be amplified by a lack of sleep and PTSD and nightmares, is heart rate irregularities or arrhythmias. I know for me personally, when I quit nicotine, this was something that I struggled greatly with. And this was a huge problem because what would happen is my heart rate would increase, my blood pressure would go up, but the increase in heart rate and feeling my heart like flutter would start to trigger pretty serious and severe anxiety, borderline leading into panic attacks. And for a lot of people, this happens when they quit smoking high concentration cannabis, especially if you're coming off of weed and nicotine at the same time. Now, something you may want to consider discussing with your family physician or a cardiologist is the temporary use of a beta blocker medication to help control the arrhythmia. Now, before I continue on, I want to say something very important because people are going to come at me and say, oh, you're just, saying quit weed to use pharmaceuticals. That's not at all what I'm saying. Listen, my doctorate is in chiropractic, okay? I'm also a certified addiction recovery coach. I'm also certified in functional medicine. So I am like the anti-medicine child poster, okay? I'm the poster child for that, all right? But here's the reality. You weren't abusing beta blockers. You weren't abusing this blood pressure medication that might help with PTSD and nightmares. If you're watching this video, there is a chance that you had a substance use disorder with cannabis, just like I did. And this is what the problem is, okay? So it's not just, oh, well, if you're going to take a medication, you might as well just keep smoking weed. That's not it. You're taking a medication in these cases to bridge the gap between addiction and sobriety and recovery. That's the goal here, and that's what I'm talking about. So I just want to be very clear on that before we talk about the last point here. But beta blockers for heart rate irregularities may be important for a lot of people to consider. Now, the last thing would be anxiety. And there's many ways to manage anxiety and depression, right? We talk a lot about lifestyle modification, which is making sure you get a good night's sleep, which, hey, if you have PTSD and you try out Prazosin after speaking to your doctor about it and it helps, the anxiety might get better because you're sleeping better. If you have heart rate irregularities and that's what's triggering panic and anxiety, and you take a beta blocker, something that you're not going to become dependent on, like you may with an anti-anxiety or an antidepressant, hey, that's a really, really good possibility and a good option, right? Taking a beta blocker for a short period of time after speaking to your doctor or your cardiologist about it. The other option outside of lifestyle modification, which is nutrition, exercise, getting a good night's sleep, and addressing the things in life that need to be addressed, right? Because anxiety is not always a bad thing. If I'm anxious about something, chances are it's because I'm procrastinating on something or I'm ignoring something that needs to be addressed. So anxiety can be an incredibly powerful motivator in a very good way. But when it goes overboard, when it's too much, the individual might need to consider a medication-assisted detox or quit, and that might involve something like a very low dose of Lexapro or some other antidepressant, in that case maybe like a Zoloft or something along those lines. Now again, talking to your doctor. I don't make medication recommendations. I'm telling you what we see people get prescribed and what we've seen work well for people going through medication-assisted detox and sobriety and recovery, okay? There's doctors out there called addictionologists. You can look that up. You can work with those types of specialists, okay? There are doctors that specialize in substance use disorders that are familiar with these very, very, very common withdrawal symptoms. I think all too often what happens is someone winds up developing one or multiple of these withdrawal symptoms. They talk to their primary care physician who may not be too familiar with the severity of cannabis substance use disorder or what's going on today even with the nicotine vapes and all the issues that these things are causing with people, especially with heart rate irregularities when people are quitting. And they're like, well, it's not that big of a deal, or, oh, geez, maybe you should smoke again. Maybe you should try doing this, because it's not something that they specialize in. And this is why I'm making this video, to kind of emphasize to you guys, if you are dealing with these things, there's a very good chance that someone else before you whom has struggled with cannabis addiction has also dealt with these things. And if they've managed to get sober and pursue recovery, there's a good chance that they have a good idea of where to find the answers to these problems, or the solutions to these problems rather, right? You have to ask though, you have to look, and you have to talk. talking for me was one of the most beneficial things I did when it came to overcoming the weed withdrawal symptoms, because it was through talking that I learned and that I heard about other people's lived experiences, which was what not only motivated me, but it gave me very useful insight as to how I could get through my own experience with THC and cannabis withdrawal symptoms. Now, another option for those of you guys who are suffering from this stuff badly, although we preach and I stand by it, quitting cold turkey on this channel, you may consider weaning off slowly. So this could be going to a lower dose of THC. This could be taking every other day off. This could be only smoking in the evenings if you were used to smoking every day, and then only smoking in the evenings with a lower dose THC, slowly increasing the blend of CBD along the way. There's many ways to taper off of cannabis, and you may, if you do that, wind up avoiding some of these very physical, very real withdrawal symptoms. That's not a guarantee though, because I've seen people try and taper off and still experience the exact same problems that day they finally quit. Some people do great with it. All right, guys, I hope this video helps you out, especially those of you who are really struggling with weed withdrawal. And if that's the case, I'd recommend book a one-on-one session with our addiction recovery coaching. Join the mental health community. It's $4.97 a month. You have nothing to lose. Or just download some of that free content and those free PDFs that we have available in the link in the video description or the pinned comment. Now, if you enjoyed this and you don't want to do any of that stuff,